Hi, and welcome back to Plan9Crunch, where every week we read out of a cold genre novel or something to that effect. A little bit ago, I read from the Mothman Prophecies, and I might do another reads on that soon. But basically, what I did was I read from the first little bit of that book in order to set up the perspective, methodology, all that sort of stuff, in terms of where John A. Keel, the author of that book, and the person who coined the term Men in Black, where he was coming from with his investigation and his anecdotes from the time period of the Mothman's first sighting to the Point Pleasant bridge collapse, as well as all the stuff in between, even some stuff before. I found it quite interesting because he laid out some areas where it's easy to go wrong, but then insists he didn't go wrong, that all of his anecdotes, all of his evidences and witnesses are the cream of the crop. Ultimately, he concludes that the Men in Black are these sorts of ultra-dimensional beings specifically out to target just him, which seems a bit irrational. In that first chapter, Keel talks about Eric von Daniken, and how he is kind of nonsense as well. But within the paranormal, supernatural studies, those are two of the big names for the ones who did it scientifically, let's say. And I found this book, Supernatural Lore of Southern Utah, in the Weber State bookstore. And I found it interesting because of the approach that Darren M Edwards is taking in relation to the discussion on other figures within this whole thing. So, introduction, academic approaches to the supernatural. My classroom is a second-floor corner room with windows that stretch nearly floor to ceiling. Sunrise to sunset, that room is awash with natural light. Natural light, the sunlight, not the beer. Anyway, so I filled it with comfortable chairs, mostly armchairs, though there are a few rockers and one couch, because I want my students to feel comfortable. I like my classes, which include courses in research, writing, and in literature, to feel less like a study hall and more like a conversation at a friend's house or one of the French salons from the Enlightenment. For the past 4 years, I've been teaching a full-year class titled Academic Approaches to the Supernatural. I don't know what students expect coming into the class, but there's a fair chance that it isn't what they're about to get. The first half of the year in Academic Approaches to the Supernatural, we look at ghost stories, curses, and urban legends from the perspective of a folklorist. That's actually where the idea for the class first germinated. During my graduate work at Utah State University, I had the great privilege of taking Folklore of the Supernatural from Dr. Jeannie Banks Thomas. In fact, I used a combination of the book she co-wrote, Haunting Experiences, and Colin Dickey's Ghostland to guide students through that first semester. The first thing I tell my students is that we aren't interested in whether stories of hauntings, Bigfoot, aliens, skinwalkers, or zombies are factually true. What we are interested in is the cultural and personal truths such stories can help us explore. As Dickey notes in Ghostland, more than just simple urban legends and campfire tales, ghost stories reveal the contours of our anxieties, the nature of our collective fears and desires, the things we can't talk about in any other way. I am passionate about the approach to this first semester because supernatural lore is so often discounted. It is disregarded as trivial and as not worth serious, reflective academic thought. As Diane E. Goldstein says, the conventional academic point of view is that supernatural beliefs are survivals from a naive past and must decline as scientific thought ascends. Often, when supernatural lore is given legitimate exploration, the only theme, inner story or deeper meaning, that people come up with is the now worn out, humans are afraid of the unknown, but these stories can teach us so much more about ourselves if we're willing to look at them with both an analytic eye and an open mind. Throughout the first semester, we cover ideas stretching from gender issues and the burning of Bridget Cleary to the commodification of belief and the rise of digital urban legends. We explore the connections between supernatural lore and cultural representation, as well as the difference between that and cultural appreciation or appropriation. We discuss what these stories can tell us about both our collective guilt and our shared grief. Much like the first semester, for the second half of the year, we don't concern ourselves with whether or not these stories are factually true. Rather, we examine the methodology used by those who purport to investigate them. We start by discussing the scientific method and the difference between data and evidence. We look at the history of spirit photography, the story behind the discovery of fear frequency, the mythologies of Delphic Oracle and Pluto's Gate. I teach them about logical fallacies, confirmation bias, and tricks like cold readings. I share stories from the history of spiritualism and seances. We talk about Daniel Douglas Hume, pronounced Hume. Oh, okay, that bit's not. It says home. It's spelled home, pronounced Hume in the parentheses. We talk about Daniel Douglas Home, pronounced Hume, a Scottish medium from the 1800s. Hume odd crowds, with feats from levitation to communing with the dead. In one particularly spectacular example, Hume is said to have levitated out of one window and back in through another in broad daylight. That is what fascinates me about Hume. Unlike the rest of the people involved in the spiritualist eruption of the 1800s, Hume would perform in the light of day outside the walls of the darkened parlor. Darkness is a tool of the con artist and charlatan. It obscures and obfuscates. It replaces detail and data with atmosphere and lofty mystery. Among this darkness, YouTube is littered with ghost hunters, cryptobiologists, and alien researchers who all try to fill their videos with the air of something academic. They create the illusion of scientific methodology. However, the substance and rigor of academia and the scientific community is nearly always missing. One of my favorite satirical ghost hunting videos points out that in every other scientific endeavor, you want to be able to see as much as possible. Yet ghost hunting sessions always take place at night in the dark, where you can see much less. That's why I'm so passionate about the ideas we explore in the second half of the year. The questions posed by supernatural lore and memory, personal interactions with the supernatural, are among the most important questions humanity faces. What is the shape and breadth of reality? Is there something after this life? How do we cope with generational guilt or trauma? These are questions worth exploring properly. If we hope to learn the answers to these and so many other questions, we must be willing to look at them in the light. If we simply accept the answers produced with shoddy methodology because they're easy or they conform to what we want to believe, we're short-cheating the lore, cheating our personal experiences, and ignoring all the questions those things can pose. Likewise, if we reject the stories as trivial, if we scoff rather than explore, we deny a central part of who we are. If we are to make an honest assessment of this lore and these experiences, we must root ourselves in skepticism. Among those individuals and groups who believe in hauntings and monsters, skepticism gets a bad name. But it's a name unfairly earned. Skeptic is not a synonym for disbeliever. After all, disbelief is itself a form of belief. If belief in something's existence is one side of the supernatural coin, then disbelief is the other. A skeptic should stand firmly in the middle, surrounded by questions, unconvinced until one side or the other provides enough verifiable, reproducible, peer-reviewed evidence to sway them. As writer and professor emeritus of physics, Chet Ramos, says in his book, Skeptics and True Believers, skeptics are children of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. They are always a little lost in the vastness of the cosmos, but they trust in the ability of the human mind to make sense of the world. They accept the evolving nature of truth and are willing to live with a measure of uncertainty. Ellipsis. They are more interested in refining their own views than in proselytizing to others. Close quote. Skeptics want to know what the data says. They want to know if things are true, not that they are true. While I am firmly a skeptic, I am also a humanist. As such, I haven't written this book for the skeptic or for the true believer. I haven't written this book to pander or convert. By examining supernatural lore and merit from a neutral stance, neither believing nor disbelieving, I hope to be more balanced in my approach to the questions they pose. I hope to create a work that, if nothing else, is honest in its approach to both gathering and exploring these stories. Some final notes. While definitions of which areas are included in southern Utah can vary wildly. For example, some categorizations include areas as far north as Moab. For the purposes of this book, I have defined southern Utah as going from Iron, Garfield, and San Juan counties down to the southern border shared with Arizona. There are some terms that it would be helpful for you to understand before starting the book. Folklore, a notion, story, or saying that is widely circulated and preserved among a people. Legend tripping, a name bestowed by folklorists and anthropologists on an adolescent practice containing elements of a rite of passage in which a usually furtive nocturnal pilgrimage is made to a site which is alleged to have been the scene of some tragic, horrific, and possibly supernatural event or haunting. Liminal spaces, a space that is neither here nor there, and in between space. Bridges and tunnels are prime examples of liminal spaces. However, the idea can also extend to places that lie in between two stations of life. Cemeteries, a place for both the living and the dead, and schools, both the entrance and exit of the institution mark life transitions for students, and the schools themselves are liminal, are examples of this. Memorit, a personal narrative relating a notable experience, particularly one involving the supernatural. These are some terms that I use interchangeably. Throughout the book, I use the terms lore, narrative, and story primarily interchangeably. However, lore more often refers to something shared by more than one person, as in local lore versus a personal narrative or story. I also use the terms urban legend and lore and folklore interchangeably at times. Likewise, I use the term natives or Native Americans and indigenous people interchangeably. While also present in the book, the term Indian or Indians is almost always used in a historical context. I acknowledge that this is an outdated term that many Native individuals and communities find offensive. Mormon, Latter-day Saint, and LDS are also used interchangeably. So the approach outlined in this first introduction is interesting compared to Mothman Prophecies, because, well, Keel, I respect Keel a lot. If you pull my leg, I respect Daniken as well. Twist my arm, I should say. I respect Daniken as well, but this assumes much less from the get-go. You had Keel assuming that some form of telepathy and psychic reading has already been assumed as fact and proven as fact. It hasn't, to my knowledge. And in his first chapter of Mothman Prophecies, Keel goes on about tulpas, but he builds up the tulpas by saying that within the dark rooms of places, when you see something over your shoulder, some kind of presence or a shadow, that should be trusted and assumed to be a tulpa, essentially. Whereas in this, it's about scientific strategies to actually prove whether or not something was in that room in the first place. We don't assume that it's a tulpa. Through this book, we just assume there's something there. We got to investigate that and find out where that leads us and what it says about us that we assumed tulpa from the beginning, or something like that. Very interesting. I recommend the book. I also recommend Mothman Prophecies, and I might have links to those. It might be difficult to find a link to this, but I will try. And thank you for watching. You can follow us on YouTube where you're watching this, TikTok. We have a Plan9Crunch podcast and blog on Facebook. And you can visit our actual blog, our physical blog at plan9crunch.com. That's a wrap.